It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Thursday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. Well, today on the podcast is going to be Herd Mentality. We have several great questions to get into that were submitted, and as a reminder, if you want me to address an item on Herd Mentality, the best way to send that in is through a Twitter DM. You can find me on Twitter at the Joe Marino. You can also send me an email, joe@thedraftnetwork.com. Before we get to the Herd Mentality questions, we do need to acknowledge that Jerry Hughes is now a member of the Houston Texans. And Hughes had a great career in Buffalo. 9 seasons with the team, never injured. I think he only missed one game, and it was in 2020, the last game of the season, when the Bills had nothing to play for, and they rested a lot of veterans, and Jerry Hughes was one of them. 9 seasons on the team, never injured. He ends his tenure in Buffalo number 4 in franchise history for sacks, behind Bruce Smith, Aaron Schobel, and Phil Hansen. More sacks than Cornelius Bennett. What a great run. Was the longest tenured member of the team. Now that mantle has been passed to Reed Ferguson, the long snapper. But I'll miss watching Jerry Hughes. He'll always be a Buffalo Bill. It's going to be strange seeing him in another uniform. I'm happy for him to get a chance to finish his career in the state of Texas, where he's from and lives, and wish nothing but the best for him and his family. And I'll certainly miss rooting for number 55. But always a Buffalo Bill, for sure. This is one of those legacy players, guys that we will always acknowledge and respect for their time and what they were able to accomplish with the team. All right, let's get into these Herd Mentality questions. First one today comes from Andy, who says, I know we talk a lot about the Bills being a 4-3 base nickel defense. When Von Miller was acquired, there was some discussion about the fact that he never really played as a true defensive end in a 4-3. He played outside linebacker with Denver for over a decade in a 3-4, and then as an edge rusher as part of the front 5 with the LA Rams. Correct me if I'm wrong here. If I sound confused, that's because I am. I just barely know what I'm talking about. The other wrinkle is that now, with the addition of Terrell Bernard in the 3rd round, there is some discussion of the Bills playing more 3 linebacker sets with terms like big nickel, thick nickel, or my personal favorite, Buffalo nickel, being thrown around. I remember when we got Von Miller, man, that really still feels awesome to say, that you remarked something to the effect of, look, Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier are going to figure out a way to use Von Miller effectively, even if that means they change their scheme a bit. I was hoping that you could take some time to explain what the 4-3 base nickel is and why it's different than what some other teams are running, and maybe give us some projections on how likely it is that we will see divergence from that with the new additions of Bernard Miller and another athletic cornerback that can theoretically lock down in man coverage in Elam. And if they do diverge, what do you think that will look like? Andy, this is a great question. I appreciate the thought that went into asking it. And so I hope that I respond in a way that brings clarity to a lot of the things that you put together here and things that I'm sure a lot of other fans are curious about. So we'll start by talking about what a 4-3 defense is, what a 4-3 defense is compared to a 4-3 base nickel defense. And so a 4-3 defense is 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. a base nickel defense. It's really a 4-2-5 that the Bills run. I wouldn't call it a 4-3 nickel. I'd call it a 4-2-5, where you have 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs, where you drop your third linebacker and bring in a slot corner. And for the Bills, that player is Taron Johnson. So the Bills' base defense is 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 DBs, 2 safeties, 3 corners, your slot corner being Taron Johnson. So that's the big difference. You swap out a linebacker for a corner or a defensive back. Some teams play a slot safety. The Bills play a slot corner. When you talk about going big nickel or buffalo nickel or thick nickel or whatever you want to call it, what you're doing is you are using a linebacker or a safety as an overhang defender. So what is an overhang defender? That's somebody who lines up on the second level of the defense outside the formation and typically splits that distance between the end man on the line of scrimmage and the closest receiver. They kind of play in between as an overhang player. And I think that's where you can see the Bills use Terrell Bernard. It's where the Panthers, when they had Sean McDermott as the defensive coordinator, used Shaq Thompson. It's where that's what they mean by the Buffalo nickel. You maintain the principles of a 4-2-5 defense, but you have a bigger player as your overhang or slot player, your nickel defender. So I agree with what you've said here in that there is a lot that has happened this offseason with defensive personnel that could suggest some scheme adjustments are coming. In fact, I would bank on it because good coaches adjust their scheme to their players. Now, I'm not going to sit here and predict that the Bills run a 3-4 defense. I'm not saying that at all. But I think you can see some creative ways that they use Von Miller and give him chances to stand up and be kind of a walk-down rush linebacker. You know, Terrell Bernard is a player that profiles well to being a big nickel, overhang defender. The Bills can go with some bigger packages on defense, but maintain their nickel principles. And then Kaiir Elam, who gives a lot more athleticism at CB2, which suggests you could see a little bit more man coverage and some more press coverage. And obviously the team prioritized linebacker depth this offseason. And so that's another signal that they want to have more depth at linebacker because they plan on playing 3 of them more often. Now, we saw the Bills run some more man coverage in 2021, especially before Trey White got injured. And so I think that they do want to do that a little bit more on third downs. So I think there's a lot that we can piece together here to give us some clues about what this defense could look like. But I think it can include some big nickel, some more man coverage, and using Von Miller as more of a rush linebacker with 3 down linemen, especially on long and late downs. So I do think you're going to see some multiplicity and diversity when it comes to this Bills defense in 2022 compared to what we've seen in Sean McDermott's, first 5 years in the job. The next one comes from Tim, and it kind of layers together with the previous question. Tim says Terrell Bernard played in a 3-3-5 defense in college. Can you see the Bills running packages with 3 defensive linemen and 8 men in coverage to further vary up defensive schemes at times? Maintains 5 DBs, but gets 3 linebackers on the field that can all cover. Could likely get some pressure on the quarterback with Von Miller, Ed Oliver, and Rousseau/Epinesa on the line, similar to the defense the Bengals were playing against the Chiefs in the playoffs with Trey Hendrickson getting pressure. Could do the same with 2 linebackers and 6 DBs instead of smaller receivers. Similar to what you were saying about the big nickel for Bernard, but getting an extra man in coverage when trying to contain teams' passing attacks. Yeah, I think this plays right in with the stuff we just talked about, Tim. And 3-3-5 is a staple of the Baylor defense. We've seen some NFL teams do more of it. The Carolina Panthers run a lot of 3-3-5. And so as we've seen defenses adjust to more drop 8, rush 3, kind of flood the coverage lanes and make it difficult for quarterbacks to slot throws and sacrifice a rusher, perhaps the Bills could do that, especially when you have a dynamic trio up front with guys like Oliver, Rousseau, and of course Von Miller to give you a better chance of getting pressure with 3 and allowing you to drop 8. Now, the Bills are typically a rush 4 team, and I still think that will be their bread and butter. But what this does is it gives you options. And so when you're playing teams like the Chiefs or other teams that want to spread you out, Cincinnati, you have more options for how you can deploy your personnel to give you your best chance of slowing down high-octane passing offenses. The next one comes from Alex, who says, your scouting report for Trey White compared to Kaiir Elam as they were drafted in a similar spot in the respective drafts. Would love to hear what you thought of Trey coming out of college. So I've got a few questions like this, and so I'm going to share some of the things that I said about Trey White in my scouting report on him coming out in 2017, and we can kind of compare that to the things that I've said about Kaiir Elam. This is what I said about Trey White coming out of LSU. I said, White projects as a starting boundary corner that is capable of functioning in man and zone while playing any technique. His best traits are his ball skills and spatial awareness, which indicate the ability to play inside and outside. White will need to limit how much contact he initiates down the field and increase his willingness to play physically with consistency. White enters the NFL with a plethora of high-level starting experience against college football's best competition and has the upside to start in the NFL right away. Two other things that I said about Trey White that I want to highlight. Under ball skills, I wrote, tracks the ball and competes well as the ball arrives with excellent technique, is pesky at the catch point and disrupts with proper timing, locates the football well and attacks. Under tackling, I said, Trey White is a secure tackler but will pass on chances to get involved and becomes a pile inspector instead. When he wants to tackle, he excels. And so I like the parallels here between Trey White and Kaiir Elam. First of all, both players coming out of the SEC and being experienced covering the best receivers in college football. Trey White did that. Kaiir Elam did that. So you love that pedigree coming out. Both are really dynamic with their ball skills. I've said repeatedly, I think Kaiir Elam might have the best ball skills in the class. And you heard what I said about Trey White, very favorable reviews regarding his ball skills. And then the same concern with tackling. I still don't think Trey White's a good tackling corner in the NFL. I don't think he's a good run defending corner. And I think I have the same questions about Kaiir Elam, where there's inconsistent results as a tackler and his run defense is often below average. And so I do think they profile very similarly. I think Trey White is a more dynamic athlete in terms of agility, change of directions, where Kaiir Elam has a bit more linear explosiveness, but doesn't have the agility. So I think there's a lot of parallels between the two players, both guys that are hungry, students of the game, guys that prepare, process-driven guys. And so I think we've learned a lot about what Sean McDermott appreciates most in corners that he's going to invest highly in. We've never seen McDermott with two cornerbacks that have this type of pedigree. And I'm really excited to see what it looks like. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? And wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and save money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure you write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know that we sent you? They have amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need over at rockauto.com. No owner wants to deal with the hassle of energy decisions. You just want your business to run smoothly and pay a fair rate for power. But coming off the back of one of the highest price winners in the last decade, if your business was a purely variable or market rate, you paid out the nose. Many New York business owners switched suppliers out of frustration, but unless they chose alternative pricing options, they're still at risk for a January repeat. Catalyst Power partners with you or your trusted energy consultant to produce a power supply plan that fits your business and your market risk tolerance. We have a suite of options customizable to your business's needs, including options that bundle with or focus on renewable energy. Right now in New York, we're offering an on-site solar solution for your business that requires zero installation, maintenance, or material purchase costs. That's right, no CapEx costs for you. To sweeten the deal, qualified businesses can be eligible for up to 6 months of at-cost energy supply from Catalyst Power. Go to catalystpower.com/lockedonbills to learn more. All right, the next one today comes from Ken, who says, something's been on my mind, or really someone. That is Jameson Crowder. I think this guy is flying under the radar. The last 2 years, he was the only guy on the Jets that did anything against the Bills, and he was a stud with Washington when healthy. I think that is the key for him. Would you discuss how you think the slot position will play out this year with Isaiah McKenzie, Jamison Crowder, and Khalil Shakir? Appreciate this question, Ken, and I would agree. Jamison Crowder's a really good football player. Really good football player. And I think he is going to be the guy in the slot. They'll sprinkle in some Isaiah McKenzie just like they sprinkled him in when they had Cole Beasley and Isaiah McKenzie. I think Khalil Shakir is a player that will get some run and develop, but to me, this is Jamison Crowder's job. And he's a really good route runner, and he's got really good hands, and he's tough and competitive. Good ball skills. Really good after the catch. And I think this is his job, no doubt about it. I'm expecting him to catch 60 or 70 passes this year. So I think that's how it plays out. And, he's a one-year deal type player. If he has a great year, I can see the Bills bringing him back. If not, then you really have a very natural succession plan in place with Khalil Shakir being that guy that can come in and do that stuff. And so I think Shakir handles the punt return duties this year. I think Isaiah McKenzie does a lot of the stuff he's typically done. Might be the primary kick returner. But I think this slot job is Jamison Crowder's. And he's a very accomplished player and a very good football player that, you're right, he is flying under the radar. Chris says, with a lot of run-heavy teams on the schedule, have the Bills improved the run D? How much of a difference will it be with Daquan Jones and Tim Settle compared to Harrison Phillips and Starlo Tulele? Is that an upgrade? Good question here. So I think that Daquan Jones, is the best run defender of all the players you mentioned. He's a better run defender than Starlo Tulele. And he's certainly a whole lot more reliable of a football player. Now, Star had his moments in Buffalo, but he was never consistent. And availability became a major issue over the last few seasons. I think you have a better player that has been more reliable in Daquan Jones. Tim Settle is a more versatile player than Star or Harrison Phillips, and he brings a whole lot more as a pass rusher and penetration style player. Now, it's certainly a different scenario as well, because how often was it just Harrison Phillips and sprinkle it in around him if Star was available or not, or just calling up Eli Onquo from the practice squad? So I think the Bills are deeper, more versatile, and quite frankly, better collectively with this new pairing at one technique. Chris has a couple of follow-ups. He says, who would fill the A.J. Klein role for heavy run sets? He said, I don't think it would be Bernard. Who fits best? I do think Bernard has a really good chance to be that player. And I think Tyrel Dotson is a guy that's been around for a while. I think he might be the guy that initially takes that job, and eventually they're going to want Terrell Bernard as a third-round pick to eventually take that role. And then Chris says, everyone knows Von Miller can rush the quarterback, But how is he in his career against the run? Von Miller's a great run defender. He's known for his pass rush, but he's a guy that consistently has played the overwhelming majority of snaps for the defenses that he's been on and has been a very good run defender. This isn't a Dwight Freeney type player where, if you guys remember Dwight Freeney with the Colts, all he ever did was rush the passer every play and didn't play the run at all. No, Von Miller is a balanced defender that is an elite pass rusher and an outstanding run defender. So I think the Bills are absolutely going to be a better run defense when you consider Greg Rousseau in year 2, Von Miller, Daquan Jones, Shaq Lawson is an outstanding run defender. I think collectively, the personnel that they have up front really should allow them to play really good run defense. I like the makeup of what they have up front from a run defense perspective and the options that they have at linebacker, to be honest with you. Mike says, you often speak about how Brandon Beane prioritizes building teams through the trenches. Looking back over his Bills draft classes, I would agree that he does with the defensive line, but not the offensive line. After reviewing the first 3 premium rounds under Beane as GM, we have drafted 5 players: Harrison Phillips, Ed Oliver, AJ Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, and Carlos Basham. For D-line, 2 being first-round picks, and 2 tackles, Cody Ford and Spencer Brown for the O-line, none being drafted in the first round. What is even more odd is Beane only drafted 2 interior offensive linemen, with Wyatt Teller in the 5th in 2018 and Jack Anderson in the 7th in 2021. Considering the interior offensive line has never been great from 18 to 2021, does that strike you as strange? Are you seeing the same trend with his free agency signings? What does this say about Beane's team building blocks? I would love to get your thoughts. So, Mike, I would agree with you that through the draft lens, the Bills have invested the premium draft capital in the D-line and not the O-line. I think that's because Brandon Beane has prioritized free agent dollars more so on the offensive line. Now, he's done so on the defensive line as well, but even more so on the offensive line in terms of, I think he wanted very specifically to have veteran offensive line options. And for Josh Allen and his development, Brandon Beane didn't necessarily want to rely on a bunch of rookies and young players on the offensive line. I think he wanted the more established players that can come in and you feel better about protecting Josh Allen as opposed to the inevitable inconsistency that comes from young players and rookies. And so while the draft picks don't line up with the philosophy of building through the trenches with an eye towards the offensive line, his free agent efforts have absolutely been that way. And I think just in general, the Bills have prioritized youth on defense through the draft. In fact, all of their first-round picks, minus Josh Allen, have been defensive players since Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane took over. But they've made the most aggressive moves on offense, whether it's trades or free agent signings, to bring in veteran players around Josh Allen to give him his best chance to develop, right? You don't want to necessarily have developing players around a developing quarterback on offense. And I think the Bills were wise to not utilize draft picks as the way to build around Josh. It was establish veterans and then go ahead and get the young players on defense. I think that's been a deliberate approach. And so, yeah, if you look through the draft, you're not going to be impressed with what the Bills have done on the offensive line. But that's because I think they've prioritized addressing that through the acquisition of veteran players. Brian says in draft recaps, I keep hearing about how great Khalil Shakir is. How did this kid fall to the 5th round? What are the downsides with him? It's a good question. It's a fair question because we keep on saying, well, I think he should have went in the 3rd round. Well, the bottom line is he didn't. He went in the 5th round. So what contributed to Khalil Shakir being available in the 5th round? Well, I came up with 4 things for you that I think answer that question. Well, first of all, his length is not good. 29-inch arms, that's the first percentile of wide receivers. So he has no length. And his wingspan, 70 3/8 inches, that's the 2nd percentile. So a very limited wingspan and catch radius, right? He's not a guy that offers much length. Number 2 is that his agility tests were poor. Only ran a 7.28 3-cone drill. That's 9th percentile. That's very poor. And then his short shuttle drill was a 4.21, which is an average time. So I don't have length. I don't have wingspan. I don't have agility in terms of measured athleticism. I think he's a good route runner, and I'm not concerned about that, but these are things that could have moved teams. He also had an 11.5% drop rate in 2021, which is not ideal. And when you think about a limited catch radius because he doesn't have much length and a high drop rate, not a great combination, although I think he has strong, confident hands and really good ball skills. And his drop percentage was much lower in other years, but as a senior in 2021, 11.5% drop rate. And then the fourth thing, and probably the most important thing that I can bring up in trying to consider why he fell, is that I think there could be some belief that the NFL views him as a slot-only player. And when that's the case on offense or defense, if you're viewed as a corner, that's a slot only, or you're viewed as a wide receiver, that's a slot only, you get pushed down the board. And so I think all four of those things kind of together led to his slide. And we had a really good wide receiver year. Tons of good wide receivers. And so as you're trying to separate the players, you've got some things here that work against Shakir that maybe push teams in the direction of selecting other players. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. It's BetOnline, and that's where the game starts. We got a few more to get to today. The next one comes from Andrew, who says, wondering if you could give us a quick background of Greg Manns and how he compares to John Feliciano as a versatile interior offensive line backup. Where does he rank among the various backup interior offensive linemen the Bills have rostered in the last few years? So I like Greg Manns. I'm excited about him. I agree with you. He's an interior offensive lineman that offers versatility, has played left guard, right guard, and center, and has a lot of experience at center. And that is similar to John Feliciano, who gives you the versatility to play all three spots. And so I think that's where you find the similarities. Now, I think stylistically, they're very different players. John Feliciano, his value was as a teammate, right? Josh Allen and the guys loved him. He's a good run blocker, a physical player, a lot of urgency. He has a hot motor. He brings an energy and an edge and a tenacity to the offense. But I think he lacks as a pass blocker. I think John Feliciano is actually a below average pass blocker. And I think that made him frustrating for me. And so I didn't think he brought enough elite caliber run blocking to make up for his poor pass blocking. And then just as a run blocker, he doesn't have much range. He's more of a power drive blocker that if you're asking him to pull and get out in space and use his lateral quickness, it's just not really what he does. Where Greg Manns, I don't think he's going to give you the power component that's just going to move bodies on the line of scrimmage as a run blocker, but I do think he gives you more range and athleticism as a run blocker, where if you wanted him to get lateral, you want to have him climb to the second level, you want to have him execute some longer pulls, you trust his athleticism more. And I think he's a much better pass blocker, where the lateral athleticism, the ability to mirror and frame blocks, he's much better. So they're really different players stylistically. They're both versatile. And I'm really intrigued by Greg Manns because I think he's a really nice fit for where I think this Bills offense is going to go in terms of scheme. But, can he endear himself to his teammates to the level that John Feliciano was, and, just kind of an important locker room presence? I think that's kind of where you might miss something with Greg Manns, but overall, I think he's got a chance to be a more effective player than John Feliciano was. Ted says the Bills double-dipped at linebacker with one eye, replacing Tyler Matakevich and using his potential cap savings this year on a new Jordan Poyer contract. Interesting take. I have a feeling Tyler Matakevich isn't going anywhere. I think the Bills are very satisfied with him as a special teams captain. They like him, as that guy in the middle of the kick return team, covering kicks and punts. I don't see it. I think Tyler Matakevich is going to make this football team. Now I think you have a good point here in that there is a cap savings opportunity with releasing Tyler Matakevich that can free up some cash to help with a new Jordan Poyer contract. And the fact that the Bills didn't do anything at safety in the draft is a good signal that the Bills have some level of belief that they can get something done with Jordan Poyer. But I don't know that I look at Terrell Bernard and Palin Spector as, okay, this gives the Bills what they need to move on from Matakevich, and then that rolls into a Poyer contract. I think they will try to get a Poyer contract done without having to say goodbye to Tyler Matakevich, because it's my belief that this team loves Matakevich and they plan on him playing out his contract. The next one comes from JR, who says, after listening to your 53-man roster projection, it had me wondering, do you think Brandon Beane might trade Jake Kumerow to the Green Bay Packers? They are in desperate need of wide receivers, and Rodgers has publicly said how much he likes him. I think if the Bills were going to trade Jake Kumerow, they'd have done it last year. And if they didn't plan on him being part of the mix this year, I'm not sure they bring him back in free agency. Sean McDermott has raved about Jake Kumerow and said things like he's a big part of who we are as a team and that he's a glue guy for the team. And so we know the Bills will pay for special teams. They love him in that role. They love him as a depth player at receiver. And I think that they want to keep him. And just based on the accomplishments of Jake Kumerow, what's his real value? I think you can think about how much Green Bay might want him and wish they had him, and what Aaron Rodgers has said. But at the end of the day, what are you really going to get back from Green Bay? A 6th or a 7th round pick, maybe? To me, you'd rather just have Kumerow as that important piece to your own football team and guy that brings great value on special teams, and you could sprinkle in at wide receiver and take some chances with him and use him as a blocker. And I feel like he's one of those glue guys, just like Tyler Matakevich and Saron Neal and Tywan Jones. And, those are players that they feel unimportant, but they're not. They're players that this team values and appreciates, and I anticipate being around. And so I think if the Bills were ever going to trade Jake Kumerow to the Packers, it would have already happened. I think they brought him back this year because they want him on the team this year. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Looking forward to tomorrow. We will have the full Buffalo Bills schedule to evaluate. And, for those of you that are new to the podcast this year, I'm excited for you to see how I break down a schedule. And, we'll have some really interesting things to talk about and reflect on, as we see the path, right? The journey ahead. We know the teams, we know where the Bills are playing, but how it's laid out is really interesting. And, we can have a lot of takeaways and discussions on that. So our schedule reaction coming to the podcast tomorrow. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.